Good morning, everyone. Welcome to today's hearing. Today we're going to begin hearing evidence from witnesses from Ryden. Is that right, Mr. Millett?
Mr. Chairman, yes, it is. Thank you. And good morning. Good morning, Madam Panel Member. I now call Mr. Simon Lawrence, please.
I do solemnly, sincerely and truly declare and affirm that the evidence I shall give shall be the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lawrence. Sit down, make yourself comfortable. Yes, Mr. Millett.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Lawrence, good morning.
Good morning.
Can I start by thanking you very much for attending this public inquiry to give your evidence? We are very grateful to you. If you have any difficulty understanding any of the questions I'm going to ask you, then please say, and I will ask the question again or put it in a different way. If you feel you need a break at any time, please let us know. We are going to take scheduled breaks, one in the morning and one in the afternoon today, but if you need a break at any other point, please do signal and we can take a short break. The other thing I would ask you to do, please, is to try to keep your voice up so that the transcriber who's sitting to your right can hear you very clearly and get down your evidence. It also helps, I should just say, not to nod or shake your head, but say yes or no, because that goes on the transcript.
Okay.
All right. Now, you've made one statement dated the 25th of September 2018. Can I please take you to it? It's on your desk in front of you if you need the hard copy, but it also appears at RYD 30094220. Can we please have that on the screen? First of all, can you please confirm to us that that is your statement to the inquiry?
It is.
Thank you. Can I please ask you to go to page 17? You'll see a signature there. Is that your signature?
It is.
Thank you. And have you read this statement recently?
I have, yes.
Can you confirm that its contents are true?
They are true, yes.
Now, there is another pair of statements made by Ryden, the company. First of all, can I please ask you to be shown RYD 3094236? This is a long witness statement signed under a statement of truth by Mr. Nick Young of DAC Beechcroft, solicitors for Ryden, the company, on the 23rd of November 2018. First, can I ask you, have you read this witness statement?
I have.
You have. Did you contribute to its being compiled?
No.
You didn't. There is also with it an index, IDX 0160. There's no need to pull that up, but I just want to read that into the record. That is an index of all the documents to which Mr. Young refers in that statement. I wanted to read it in so that it's formally in the public domain. Can I also show you, please, the second company statement, RYD 3094310. This is dated the 15th of March 2019, also signed by Mr. Nick Young of DAC Beechcroft Solicitors. This is the second company statement. Have you seen this statement before?
I believe so, yes.
Did you contribute to its being compiled, do you
No.
think? You didn't. It also has an index, IDX 0249. No need to pull that up. Again, I just read that out into the record so that it's there formally for people to see. Now, Mr. Lawrence, can I then ask you about some questions about your background, please? You tell us in your statement, and it's for the record, paragraph 5, that you studied welding and fabrication at college before you joined Ryden in October 2004. Is that correct?
Yeah, many years before that, but yes.
Yes, and you joined Ryden in 2004 as an assistant site manager.
Correct.
And I think you became a site manager at Ryden in 2007, yes?
Yes, it did, yeah.
And you were promoted to project manager in 2011.
Sounds correct, yes. Yeah.
And again, you were promoted to contracts manager in April 2014.
Correct.
And I think you left Ryden's employment on the 23rd of October 2015. Is that right?
Correct, yeah.
Yes. Now, during all of that time, you worked, I think, on refurbishment projects for occupied buildings. Is that right?
That's correct, yeah.
After you started at Ryden in 2004, am I right that you obtained a Chartered Institute of Building Level 4 certificate in site management?
Yeah, the certificate and diploma, yes, correct.
And a diploma in site management.
Yes.
Are they one of the same?
Two different stages of the same thing, yes, effectively.
I see. Did either stage of the same thing contain any education on the building regulations?
It might have touched on the fact that they were there and what they were, but not in depth knowledge of. No, it was an overview, or is an overview of construction, the processes.
I see. Did any part of that education require you to read the building regulations?
I don't recall. I don't think so.
No. What about fire safety of building materials?
No.
No. What about contract management? Was there any training in contract management as part of that course, or those courses?
Again, it would have been a high-level view. It's a course aimed at of construction management,
I see.
rather than technical details or anything like that. So it would have touched on it, but not in depth.
I see. Can I then ask you to help me with some questions I have on contract management on this project, the Grenfell Tower project? First, please turn to page 8 of your statement and look with me at paragraph 40. You can see there in the middle of that paragraph that you say Ryden's role, you see that, was to appoint specialist third-party designers to undertake the design works and work package subcontractors to undertake the building aspects of a project. Ryden's role was then to manage and coordinate the work of those third parties. You see that?
Yes.
And if you turn to the top of the next page, please, and look at paragraph 45 with me, you see that you say there that your role involved, and looking at it at the fourth line down, managing contractual obligations, you see that? And dealing with client instructions, liaising with the professional team, designers, architects, structural engineers, etc., to coordinate and manage the process of design, though not the design itself, ensuring that the designs comply with the client requirements. You see that?
Yes.
Now, we're going to talk about design in more detail later in your evidence together, but generally, just for the moment, Mr. Lawrence, is it fair to say that as contracts manager for Ryden, it was your responsibility to know what obligations Ryden owed to other parties under its contracts with those parties?
That would be fair, yep.
Yes. Was it also your responsibility to know what responsibilities other parties owed to Ryden under their contracts with Ryden?
Yes.
Yes. And to the best of your ability, was it also your job to ensure that Ryden and those other parties complied with their contractual obligations to each other?
It was.
Now, I'd like to look at what that role on the Grenfell Tower project entailed in a bit more detail. Can I ask you, please, to turn to page 3 of your statement and look with me at paragraph 14. You say there, at paragraph 14, in the last sentence, the contract manager role for Ryden, you see that, is to oversee construction projects from inception to completion. This may involve overseeing more than one project at a time. Now, Mr. Lawrence, I'm going to put a list of 8 things to you, one by one, and I'm going to ask you if you agree that your role as contracts manager would have included them, or did include them. Okay. Would you agree first that your role included overseeing procurement?
Yes, I was involved in it, yes.
Would you say that your role included overseeing the health and safety of the construction work?
Yes.
Did it include attending meetings and briefings to ensure effective communication between clients, residents, subcontractors, and other parties involved in the project?
Yes.
Did it involve arranging coordination meetings between the parties involved in the project?
Yes, yeah.
Did it involve managing the project team
It did.
and ensuring extra staff, as part of that, as extra staff were used if necessary?
Yes.
Did it involve monitoring contractors, consultants and suppliers in order to ensure that the aims of the refurbishment project are met?
It did, yep.
And by aims of the refurbishment project, can I just ask you, were those the aims that were set out in the contract that Ryden would have with its particular client?
Yes.
Did your role involve managing financial risks by recognising and reporting the implications of any changes occurring during the contract?
Yes, it would, yep.
And did you report to Mr. Blake, the refurbishment director, or any other refurbishment director occupying that role?
I did, yes.
Yes, thank you. So your role was to manage not only Ryden's in-house resources, but also any external resources, such as subcontractors, consultants and suppliers, in order to ensure that Ryden met its own contractual obligations.
Correct.
Yes,
But
thank
I
you.
obviously did that with a team, so
Yes. Yes. Would you agree that in order to perform the role that you've been describing to us, it was essential that you maintained effective communication with those to whom you were giving instructions within Ryden?
yes.
Would you also accept that in order to perform that role, it was essential that you maintained effective communication with third parties under Ryden's instruction, for example, subcontractors?
Yes.
Yes. And the same question in respect of those up the chain, for example, the TMO?
Yes.
Yes. Can I ask you to turn, please, to RYD 3094244? This is the tender pack submitted by Ryden for the Grenfell Tower project, dated the 13th of February 2014. And you say in your statement, and it's at paragraph 14, I don't need to show it to you, that you were part of the team involved in putting the tender bid submission together. Did you read this document before it was sent out?
Yes, I would have done, yes.
Did you have any role in approving this document before it was sent out?
Ultimate approval, no, but yes, as a team, we would go through it and make sure it's correct before we sent it out, yes.
If you turn, please, to page 34 within the document, we'll find your CV there. Did you write that yourself?
It was probably done by one of the bid writers,
Right.
but would have involved me, obviously, putting information in there, yes.
I see. Did you have primary responsibility for its contents?
Well, it would have been I would have provided my information to the bid writer for it to be
Yeah.
collated.
And if anything was in there that was wrong, you would have corrected it, presumably?
If there was anything obvious in there, yes, definitely.
Yes.
Yeah.
Now, you're described there as, if you look on the right-hand side, under position within the team, as design/stroke pre-construction manager. You see that?
Yes.
And was that because this was produced before you were promoted to contracts manager?
Correct.
Yes.
Yep.
Did anybody take over the role of design/stroke pre-construction manager when you became contracts manager?
I don't think it was a defined role within Ryden.
Right.
Pre-construction manager would be. Design manager, we didn't have a design manager particular role. It was trying to indicate what role I'd take, or what role I'd taken to date in helping in the tender.
I see. Was the role or job that you'd taken to date absorbed into your contract manager role in respect of the Grenfell project?
Yes.
Looking at the right-hand column of this page at the top, it says Simon has been the main point of contact with the client throughout the tender process. He has used his knowledge to formulate what we believe to be the most robust and deliverable solution for Grenfell Tower. You see that?
Yes.
Is that a fair summary?
Yes.
So the main contact with the client throughout the tender process would have been you.
For any of the site stuff, yes. Yes.
I see. And the client was the TMO, as we know.
Yes, correct.
Yes. Now, what knowledge, quotes unquotes, did you use to formulate what you say we believe to be the most robust and deliverable solution for Grenfell Tower?
My input was one of a construction and program and safety input within the bid. So my experience, having joined Ryden, was what I used to
I see.
to go into the bid.
Did that include technical knowledge?
It would include technical knowledge, yes.
Did it include knowledge of the products included in the tender?
I'd used them before, so yes.
Could you just repeat that again? There was an inaudible word you used. Could you just
Sorry, I've worked on projects that use the same, if you're talking cladding specifically, cladding before,
I see.
yes.
I see. So the knowledge that you brought, referred to in your CV here, to this project would have included knowledge of the particular cladding products used on previous projects in which you were involved?
Yes,
I see.
it would be
Right.
cladding, tower blocks, occupied refurb.
Very good. Now, the word robust is used there. What would that mean?
Experienced?
Okay. What about safe?
What would safe mean?
Yeah. When you use the word robust in your CV in relation to the deliverable solution for Grenfell Tower, would that include safe?
Yes.
It goes on. Post-award, Simon will continue to work with the contract and project managers to ensure the scheme design, planning and mobilisation is as effective as possible. Now, you are, of course, the contract manager post-award, but apart from that, is that a fair summary of your role after Ryden was awarded the tender?
After they were awarded, no. So the initial, at the time of doing the tender, I was working in pre-construction, so I was working on bids.
Yes.
And whilst I would have suspected that should we be successful that I would have more of an involved role on site or in the post award contract, at that time we didn't necessarily know that, but so it changed once we got awarded the contract. It changed. They needed somebody to deliver that contract, and I was chosen to deliver it.
I see. Well, we'll explore that a little bit later, perhaps. But can you just help me? Is there a difference between a project manager and a contracts manager at
Yes.
Ryden?
Yes.
What is the difference?
A project manager will generally be a site-based senior manager that looks after just that one project, where a contracts manager will oversee that project and others, but isn't site-based.
I see. Who is the more senior? Or, is one more senior to the other?
Contracts manager.
Contracts manager. Now, it says here that post-award Simon will continue to work with the contract and project managers. Does that indicate that you were neither of those on this project?
At the time of writing that,
Yes.
then yes, I hadn't been chosen to be either the project or the contract manager on the job.
I see. And then you subsequently were promoted to or became the contract manager?
Yes.
For this job?
Yes.
Yes. Now, it says in order to ensure that the scheme design is as effective as possible. You see that? Does that indicate that your role was to ensure that the design proceeded in line with its budget?
It would be budget, regulations, program. It would be a combination of things. Yes.
So budget, regulations, program. By program you mean timing, schedule?
Yes. Yes.
I see. And by regulations, what do you mean?
That it complied with its obligations under the contracts and.
I follow. Obligations under the contract, but you say regulations.
Yes. Sorry. Well, within the contract there will be stipulations of the fact that it needs to comply with statutory regulations.
I see.
So
just to be clear,
one the same. Sorry.
No. So just to be clear, you're saying through your CV that you saw your role as ensuring that the design proceeded in line with the regulations that you've just described to us.
Yes.
Statutory regulations.
So ultimately, as a contracts manager, the delivery of the project was that you were making sure that the whole project was being delivered.
Now, we don't need to go back to paragraph 45 of your statement because I showed it to you a few minutes ago, where you say that your role was to coordinate and manage the process of design, though not the design itself, ensuring that the designs comply with client requirements. Can we take it that the scheme design, being as effective as possible, included ensuring compliance with the client's requirements?
Yes.
Yes. Do you accept, I think you do accept, but help me, that among those requirements were those set out in the contract?
Yes.
Yes. So is it fair to say that within Ryden, post-award on this project, you were in charge of ensuring that the design complied with the contract? I think you've confirmed that before. I just want to ask you a question about Alan Sharrocks, who was the contract manager at the time, wasn't he?
Yes.
Is it fair to say that you stepped into Mr. Sharrocks' role when you became contracts manager in April 2014?
Yes, he moved on to do other projects. And
So can we take the description of his role as accurate for the one you ultimately performed from that date?
I would have thought so. I've not read it, but I would have thought so, yes.
Okay. Now, can we look to the previous page, please, of this document, page 33? This is Mr. Sharrocks' CV, and his position within the team at that time, this is February 2013, don't forget, is described as contracts manager there. And he was said to be, this is under role within team, it says, Alan will be responsible for overall management of all aspects of the contract delivery. From overseeing the final design phases, Alan will manage on-site delivery teams in terms of customer care, resource management, progress, partnering, quality, cost, performance monitoring, and CSR initiatives. Can we take it that that was a fair description of your role on the project once you stepped into his shoes in April 2014?
Yes, I think it's a fair description.
Thank you. A little bit lower down, in the right-hand column on that page, within Alan Sharrocks' CV, it says benefits to the project. And the second paragraph there, it says that Alan is able to positively contribute technical expertise and facilitate informed choice for clients and residents during value engineering and decision-making processes. This applies to projects at both tender, pre-tender and pre-start stages. You see that?
Yes.
So that applied to you, did it, when you became contract manager in April 2014?
Yes, it would do, yeah.
Yes. When it says that he and then you would positively contribute technical expertise, what was that?
That's based around how to construct safely the project. Rather than the distinction of a designer that would have in-depth technical knowledge of products. So we would technically know how things are put together and how to get access to put them together, and how to do them safely. That's our expertise.
I see. Does this suggest that it was your job, when you took over his job as contracts manager on this project, to advise the client on technical implications of decisions taken during the project?
Yes, if we would have done, yes.
Yes. And it specifically identifies value engineering as an area where that advice would be necessary. That's right, is it? So your job would be to advise the client on value engineering.
I think that's fair.
Yes. Now, given that a significant element of value engineering is making specification changes to reduce cost, would you agree that this sentence suggests that your technical expertise would be available for use in value engineering?
Yeah, I think that'd probably be fair, yeah.
And would that include detailed knowledge of the products to be used and any alternatives which might be suggested?
Well, when you say detailed knowledge, sorry, can you explain what you mean by detailed knowledge?
Knowledge of the nature and performance of the products.
We wouldn't necessarily know we'd have known the sort of the overview, so what the product did. We'd know what a rain screen cladding, for example, did as an overall system, but we wouldn't know the in-depth detail of all the technical, technical specifications behind it. No.
Right, I see. Can I ask you to go to an expert's report, but this is actually an easy way of getting to a public document. PHYR 603, page 15, please. This is Mr. Paul Hyatt's experts report in this inquiry. And at page 15, we have paragraph 3.3.21, and he quotes from the definition of, or he quotes the definition of value engineering from the RIBA Stage Guide 2015. Were you familiar with the RIBA Stage Guide 2015?
Yes, I would be.
Once it became public. Now, this defines value engineering as a systematic and organised approach to provide the necessary functions in a project at the lowest cost. Value engineering promotes the substitution of materials and methods with less expensive alternatives without sacrificing functionality. We know this is 2015, but was this how you understood the term value engineering when you first joined the Grenfell Tower project in March or April 2014?
Yes.
Can I ask you to go to TMO 10048-120? This is a set of meeting minutes compiled by Artelia for progress meeting number 13 on the 24th of July 2015, and you're present at that. Now, this is obviously some way into your involvement in the project, and indeed some way into the project itself. Did you see you were there, the fifth cast list member down? You see that?
It says so, yeah.
Can I ask you to go to page 2, please? And let's look together at item 1.4. SL confirmed he was now full-time on site as contracts manager for Ryden. Does that tell us that you weren't full-time on site in that role before that date?
Yeah, correct.
Right. Now, this date is obviously July 2015. Do you know when, either accurately or even roughly, you did start full-time on site?
No, I couldn't tell you.
But certainly by July 2015, you think? Looking at this note.
Well, the minutes say so, yes. I mean, I don't recall the minutes, but I would say that suggests that I'm spending more time on the Grenfell project than any other.
Yes. Well,
So-
it says what it says, that you are now full-time on site. I mean, I think you've confirmed that as accurate. How much time had you spent on site before that, Mr. Lawrence? Do you remember?
It would vary with other commitments. It could be 1 day a week, it could be 3 days a week, it could be 4 days a week. It would just vary on other commitments with other projects.
Yes. How many other projects were you working on before this moment when you went full-time?
There was another project the other side of London.
I see. The other side of London?
Yes.
Can you tell us what that was?
Herbert and Jacobson. So Aldgate.
Aldgate. Was that a residential building?
It was, yeah.
Was it a high-rise?
No.
I now want to turn to a different topic, which is Ryden's contractual obligations. Now, can I start with the amended JCT design and build contract? This is at TMO 100-41790. And we'll see from that, that's not the right document. Well, perhaps we'll come back to that when we see it. But from recollection, do you remember that Ryden signed the contractual documentation formally on the 30th of October 2014?
Yeah, I won't remember the date, but yes.
Can we take it that as contracts manager, you were, for the project, you were familiar with the terms of this contract?
I would have it as reference, so yes, I would be. I couldn't repeat it all back to you, but yes.
Did you ever study it in detail?
I would have read through it initially, but that would have been it.
Okay. I'm afraid I gave you a wrong reference by a single digit. Can I ask you to go to TMO 100-41791? Now, there it is. And you can see the date of the signature. Can we take it that you were familiar with the main or the important obligations of Ryden thereunder?
Yes, I believe so, yeah.
Yeah. Can I ask you what steps you took to ensure that those employees of Ryden who were working on the project under you, if I can put it that way, or around you in your team, were familiar with the obligations set out in this document?
We'd have a project file and it would have the documents on, and it would be shared with the whole team, so that it was there for reference if they needed it.
Can I ask you to turn to page 265 in this document?
Can I just ask you this, Mr. Lawrence? This is a standard form document, I think, is that right?
It appears to be, yes. Yeah.
And is it one that you'd worked with before? Did you have familiarity with its overall content?
Overall, yes.
Thank you.
Yes. We'll come to look at some of the detailed terms very shortly. Just in general terms, you say that it was there for reference if they needed it. Did you take any steps to ensure, for your own satisfaction, that those members of your team had done so that they knew what they were supposed to be doing?
The team would generally rely on the information contained within the contract, so all the lists that we've got on the screen at the moment,
well,
so all the documents and tender documentation, etc. But as far as contractual wording, I don't think that would be a daily occurrence of a team to be reading it.
No, I'm sure not. I'm sure it wouldn't be a daily occurrence that you would go through a long and complex document such as this. But my question was a slightly different one, which was, did you take any steps yourself to satisfy yourself that those members of your team had at least a familiarity with the obligations that Ryden had to its client?
I'm not sure we didn't. If you're implying that we should be, or we could have sat down and gone through the contract, then no, we didn't.
All right. Now, looking at page 265, this is a sheet entitled Enhancements and Improvements to Grenfell Tower Schedule of Contract Information, 29th of July 2014. So this was produced after the contract had been awarded, but prior to its formal signature. And it lists documents that that Ryden were provided with. Am I right about that?
Correct, yeah.
Yeah. Did you familiarise yourself with these documents?
Yes, I'd been through them, yes.
Were you aware of whether anyone else at Ryden had looked at these documents?
Well, they would have done to be able to know what they were building.
Yeah. And Ryden has assisted the inquiry by providing this document, a conformed copy, of which is in a different document. Can I ask you to look at that? It's RYD 3094235. And you can see from the front page that it's under the D&B 2011, Design and Build Contract 2011. And I'm going to show you a selection of clauses in this document and ask you about them. Can I turn first, please, to page 63? Now, at the time of entering the contract, if you look at contractors' obligations, general obligations, you can see at the top, were you familiar with clause 2.1.1? You could see the red, which is amendments, but in the unamended form, were you familiar with clause 2.1.1?
I couldn't. If you hadn't shown me it, I couldn't tell you what was in it. No, we would know the general principle, what the contract was there for, and was asking us to do.
Yeah.
If we had any need to refer back to the contract, then of course we'd open it and read it. But
yeah,
it's not a document for general consumption.
I'm not surprised.
Daily, should we say?
I'm not surprised about that, but let me put the question a slightly different way. You can see that this provision sets out the obligation on the contractor to carry out and complete the works in a proper and workmanlike manner in accordance with, as it goes on, and in compliance with the contract documents. But it says in red, in accordance with good building practice. Just as a matter of principle, would you accept that that was an obligation on Ryden?
Yes.
And it was an obligation you were familiar with, was it, at the time?
Yes.
Looking down the page a little bit further, you can see that it says at 2.5 or 2.1, I think, 5.1, the contractor warrants that it has not used and shall not use and has exercised and shall continue to exercise the standard of skill and care required by clause 2.17.2.1 to ensure that it has not and shall not specify, authorise, cause or allow to be used in the works any products or material which, and then it's 2.1.5.1.1, do not conform with British or European standards where appropriate or codes of practice, or where no such standard exists, do not conform with a British Board of Agreement certificate. And then below that, 2.1.5.2, the contractor shall immediately notify the employer if it becomes aware of any proposed or actual specification and or use in the works of any products and or materials which do not comply with clause 2.1.5.1. Were you familiar when you came into the project as contracts manager with that provision, either generally or specifically?
Generally, yes.
Generally, yes. Can I ask you to turn the page, please, and look at clause 2.2.1? It says, and I'll read it, all materials, goods and workmanship used in the execution of the works shall be of such kinds and of such quality as are necessary to enable the contractor to comply with his obligation under this contract. And then 2.2.2, the contractor shall not make any substitution, you see that, for any materials, goods or workmanship specified or described in the employer's requirements, or, if not specified or described in the employer's requirements, as set out in the contractor's proposals or in the specifications revised and returned to the contractor by the employer in accordance with the contractor's design submission procedure set out in Schedule 1, without the prior consent not to be unreasonably withheld or delayed in writing of the employer. Were you familiar with that provision, or at least the general principles in it at the time of coming into the contract?
Yes, the general principles in it, yeah.
Project. Thank you.
Yeah.
Can I ask you to turn, please, next to page 68? And look with me, please, at clause 2.15 there in the middle of the page under the heading Divergences from Statutory Requirements. And that says, if the contractor or employer becomes aware of any divergence between the statutory requirements and, 1, the employer's requirements, including any change, or 2, the contractor's proposals, he shall immediately give the other notice specifying the divergence, and the contractor shall notify the employer of his proposed amendment for removing it. With the employer's consent, which shall not be unreasonably delayed or withheld, the contractor shall entirely at his own cost and no additional cost to the employer, save as provided in clause 2.15.2, complete the design and construction of the works in accordance with the amendment, and the employer shall note the amendment on the contract documents. Again, Mr. Lawrence, were you familiar with this provision, either in general terms or specifically, when you came into the project?
In general terms, yes.
General terms, yes. Did you actually look at this provision specifically, do you think?
No, I wouldn't have read through the JCT contract or the not, so I wouldn't have done.
Okay.
I would have done earlier in the project to familiarise myself as we normally would, but apart from that, it's not a general document you
Right.
would daily refer to, unless there was an issue or a cause to do so.
On the basis that you had at least an understanding in principle, if not the precise language of this clause, what did you understand this obligation to entail?
The 2.1.
2.15.
2.15.
Yes.
That if anything changes throughout the project, we need to notify the client effectively.
Thank you. Can I ask you to turn the page, please, and look with me at 2.17? This sets out a number of things, but under 2.17.1, it says, to the extent, the contractor shall, to the extent set out in clause 2.17.2.1 below, be fully responsible in all respects for the design of the works, including, and if you look a little bit lower down, under 2.17.1.1, any design contained in the employer's requirements, and for any discrepancy in or divergence between the employer's requirements and or the contractor's proposals and or any drawings, details, documents or other information submitted by him in accordance with clause 2.8. And then under clause 2.17.1.2, but not limited to the coordination and integration of all design and the interface between design elements for the works. See that?
Yes.
And then under 2.17.1.3, all aspects of design, development, selection of goods and materials, and the satisfaction of performance specifications included or referred to in the employer's requirements, the contractor's proposals, this contract, or any change. At the time of entering into this contract, or at the time of your entry into the project, were you familiar with these particular provisions, clause 2.17.2, and of that, clause 2.17.2.1 and clause 2.17.1.3, at least in general terms,
In
if
general
not
terms,
specifically?
yes.
Yes. Do you accept that, or rather, let me put it this way, did you understand from the moment you came into the project that Ryden had warranted that all design work carried out by Ryden had been and would be completed using all the reasonable skill and care to be expected of a professionally qualified and competent design and build contractor?
Yes.
And one experienced in the carrying out of such work for projects of a similar size, scope, value, character, and complexity to the works?
Yes.
Yes. Did you also understand that Ryden had warranted that any design produced or to be produced by any design consultant or subcontractor with design responsibility had been performed to that same standard?
Yes.
Can I ask you to turn to page 70, please? Which is where 2.17 ends, with 2.17.2.3 just at the top of the page there. Let's look at it together. Subject to clause 2.17.2.1, which I've just shown you. The contractor shall design and construct the works in compliance with all consents, including the discharge of any reserved matters in planning consents relating to the works, statutory agreements, statutory requirements, relevant codes of practice, British standards or EU equivalents and manufacturers' recommendations, and the requirements of the insurers of the employer, insofar as details have been provided to the contractor at the date of this contract. Again, were you familiar with that provision, at least in principle, if not in detail?
In principle, in general terms, yes.
And do you agree with me that the reference to statutory requirements and relevant codes of practice would include the building regulations 2010?
I would agree, yes.
Yes. Was it your understanding that Ryden had a direct design responsibility to ensure that the works complied with the relevant specifications, codes of practice, and the building regulations 2010?
We would by contract, yes.
And would that be so whether or not the design had been completed by Ryden or any of its subcontractors or subconsultants?
I agree, yeah.
Yeah. And again, whether that work was completed before or after Ryden's appointment by the TMO?
Yes.
Yes. And in order to ensure that the work did comply, would you agree that Ryden would have to analyse the specifications and the drawings provided by the architect to ensure that it was possible for Ryden to comply?
We would do that with specialist advice. So it wouldn't just be in-house and us doing it, but yes, it would have to analyse it.
Yes. Okay. Well, we'll come back to in-house, out-of-house shortly, or later, but thank you for that. Do you also agree that in order to develop the design, your contract required you to analyse the specification and design intent, in order to ensure that you were able to comply with the building regulations?
Yes, I agree with that, yeah.
Yeah. Did Ryden, to your knowledge, take any steps as a company to ensure that its employees on this project understood the regulatory requirements applicable to it, which Ryden had undertaken to its client that it would ensure compliance with?
Sorry, could you repeat that again?
Yes. Did Ryden take any steps as a company to ensure that its employees on this project understood the regulatory requirements which applied to this project, which Ryden had promised that it would ensure compliance with?
They would understand. We would all understand in general terms. So we would understand that there are building regs and they need to be complied with, but we wouldn't know to the, every subsection and et cetera, et cetera.
Right. Well,
So in general terms, yes, we would know. We would all know.
Right.
That we need to comply.
were there any systems in place at Ryden to ensure that the employer's requirements and the contractor's proposals were scrutinised so that any divergence from the requirements and proposals from the statutory requirements could be identified?
I'm not sure there's any process. I'm not sure there was any particular sort of written process that forms to be filled in, etc., within Ryden that is required. But as part of the tender, the pricing, the build process, that they would all be scrutinised. Yes.
Who would they be scrutinised by?
By a combination of the managers, as in Ryden managers, and the subcontractors and designers.
I see. Were there any systems in place at Ryden to ensure that Ryden complied with its obligation to comply with the employer's requirements and the contractor's proposals?
Again, if you're talking about process, I don't recall what
Right.
process they had in place at the time.
Yeah.
But
Right.
we would carry out that by using our subcontractors, managers, and the whole team. So.
Okay. Well, let's see if we can get further with that under the next topic to which I'm now going to turn, Mr. Lawrence, which is the employer's requirements themselves. And within that, can I start by examining with you the preliminaries?
Yes.
Now, as we've talked about already, Ryden was under a duty to ensure, as we've seen from paragraph 2.1.1 of the amended contract, that the works were carried out in compliance with the contract documents. And those included the employer's requirements. Let's look at those. That's TMO 1004171 at page 84, which is there on the screen. At the time of entering into the contract with the TMO, did you familiarise yourself with the employer's requirements?
I had been through them, yes. Yeah.
You've been through them?
Yeah.
Can I ask you to look at page 87 first, please? And look at part 2A, A10, project particulars. You see that?
Yes.
And under paragraph 110, which is the whole of the page, there's a subpart of that towards the bottom which says design. You see that?
Yes.
All design work completed to date, RIBA stage E, is included with this tender document, and the contractor shall become responsible for the design and its further development and completion. The contractor shall have full responsibility for the design of all the works. Now, do you accept that the employer's requirements imposed a design responsibility on Ryden?
Yes.
Yes. Can I ask you to turn to page 128 in the same document? This is part 2A, page 44 at the bottom, and we're going to look at section A32, management of the works. You see that? And under that, generally, there's a paragraph 110. You see that?
Yes.
Supervision. General, accept responsibility for coordination, supervision, and administration of the works, including subcontracts. Coordination, arrange and monitor a programme with each subcontractor, supplier, local authority, and statutory undertaker, and obtain and supply information as necessary for coordination of the work. Do you accept that Ryden accepted responsibility to do that?
Yes.
Thank you. Moving to the bottom of the same page, you can see 119B, building control. The contractor will be responsible for providing additional construction stage information to building control. Do you accept that it was Ryden's duty to provide additional construction stage information to building control?
Yes.
Page 135, second from the bottom, paragraph A33-170A, manufacturer's recommendations, stroke instructions. General, comply with manufacturer's printed recommendations and instructions current on the date of the invitation to tender. Changes to recommendations or instructions, submit details. Ancillary products and accessories, use those supplied or recommended by main product manufacturer. Agreement certified products, comply with limitations, recommendations and requirements of relevant valid certificates. Again, same question, Mr. Lawrence. Do you accept that that set out Ryden's duty there, including to comply with manufacturer's instructions?
Yes.
Can I ask you to look at page 141, a third of the way down that page, please? You can see there are a number of things on that page, but quality control against paragraph 630. Do you see that?
Yes.
And it says procedures there. Establish and maintain to ensure that the works, including the work of the subcontractors, complied with specified requirements. Records, maintain full records, etc., and then content of records, and there's a list set out there. Again, Mr. Lawrence, do you accept that it was Ryden's duty to ensure that the works, including the work of the subcontractors, complied with the specified requirements?
I do, yes.
Yes, and that would include the contractual requirements.
Yes.
Yeah. And that included full record keeping relating not only to Ryden's work, but the work of its subcontractors too.
Yes.
Yes. Can I then turn to the NBS specification? Now, you'll find this at SEA 50169. This is a document created by Studio E, and this one is dated the 3rd of January 2014, although in fact there were earlier drafts of this in November 2013. But looking at this document, did you read this document when you came into the project in the spring of 2014?
Yes, I would have read through it.
Right.
I'm not sure line by line, but yes, you would go through to see what products are being used, yes.
Presumably, can I take it that this was a pretty important document for you as contracts manager to be familiar with?
It'd be one of a number, yes.
Yes. Can I ask you to turn, please, first to page 64? And let's look together at that. H92 rain screen cladding. And at the top of the page, it says there, to be read with preliminaries stroke general conditions. And then looking at the second bullet point, it says the manufacturers noted within this specification are indicative and may be substituted with similar or equal alternatives. Now, as we can see from the top of the page, this is all to do with the rain screen cladding, but we have similar examples appearing elsewhere in this specification. Did you understand, first of all, did you read and become familiar with what this is saying here?
I understand it, and it's a standard term within the NBS spec, so yes.
I see. This is a standard term within the... and have you come across it before? Or
Yes.
had you come across it before? Yeah. Yes. And what did you understand by the words similar or equal alternatives? Similar or equal in what sense?
You would guess in every sense it would be performance, visual. It's giving you the opportunity to use one manufacturer over another that would supply the same type of material. That's generally what it's aimed at.
In Mr. Soanes's witness statement, and I can show you this if you want, just for the record, it's paragraph 343.1 at SEA 3014273. We don't need to turn it up, but we can if you like. He says that the specialist's cladding subcontractor would hold responsibility for all aspects of their system, and the successful contractor had the discretion to suggest alternative products or materials. Did you consider when you came into the project that Ryden had that discretion?
Yes, we could have changed.
And what about in respect of manufacturers? Did you have a discretion to change manufacturers?
We did, yes. but with the acceptance of the client, we wouldn't just go and change manufacturers. But yes,
Did Ryden investigate changing manufacturers or products or materials?
I think we at tender stage we offered alternatives. As we were asked to do, but I think there was another manufacturer of ACM cladding.
We'll come to that in due course, but just in general terms.
Yes.
Yes. And who within Ryden would have suggested or was responsible ultimately for suggesting alternative materials and products or alternative manufacturers?
Well, contractually it'd be Ryden.
Yes. In practice?
In practice, the knowledge would come via the specialist subcontractors.
Right. I see. Thank you. Now, can we look at page 68, please, of this document, a few pages on, and look at paragraph 220 together. Specification, compliance standards, the Centre for Window and Cladding Technology, CWCT, standard for systemised building envelopes. You see that?
Yes.
And underneath it, it says, reference information for the duration of the contract, keep available at the design office, workshop, and on-site copies of, and there are two publications. The first is the Centre for Window and Cladding Technology, CWCT, standard for systemised building envelopes. And the second is publications invoked by the CWCT standard for systemised building envelopes. See that? Did you note this paragraph when you were putting together Ryden's tender?
Not specifically, no.
No. Did you note this paragraph after you had won the tender?
Not specifically, no.
Is there any particular reason why you didn't pick that up?
I would suggest because of the amount of documentation, drawings, and information contained with the whole build. It didn't get picked up.
Right. Is this a standard provision you'd seen before, or is this?
It's not one that I would have been if you'd have asked me before showing it to me, then I wouldn't have been able to pick it up. No, but I would say as the MBS spec is a standard document template, then it probably is in when there's range screen cladding and there's curtain walling, etc. So yes, it could well be, but
okay. Let me see if I can get it a slightly different way.
Sorry.
When you came into the project in the spring of 2014, was this provision, specification, specifying compliance with the CWCT guidance, a standard insert into an NBS specification that
Yes.
you'd seen before?
yes,
You had seen it before?
yes.
I see.
I'd seen the CWCT reference before. Yes.
Right. And what was your experience of the documents produced by CWCT? Had you used them before?
No.
No. Had you worked on any previous projects in which the CWCT standard was a contractual requirement?
Quite possibly on all the previous ones.
You say quite possibly. Do you know?
Well, not without putting up the MBS spec from the previous projects.
No,
No,
okay.
I couldn't
Right.
tell you.
Are you familiar with the guidance, the CWCT standard for systemised building envelopes, or were you at the time?
No.
No. Let's have a look at it. It may be brief then. CWCT 5046, please. This is its first page, and it's paragraph or part 6 that contains fire performance that we're interested in. But just looking at the front page there, is that a document that you were familiar with, do you think, at the time of the Grenfell Tower project?
No.
No. Well, then let's take this quite quickly. Can we take it then that this was not a document that you kept available at the design office workshop and on site?
We wouldn't have had a copy on site. No.
Is there any reason why that is?
It obviously wasn't picked up in all the documents we had to go through and comply. It obviously wasn't noticed.
I see. Can you explain why it wasn't noticed?
Just the sheer amount of information, I would suggest, but
Okay. On previous projects, do you recall having this document on site or in the workshop or in the office?
No, because I've not seen it before.
Right. But let's take this quickly then. If you can look at page 11 of this document, in paragraph 6.2, I just want to show you the fourth and the fifth paragraphs down. The building envelope shall not be composed of materials which readily support combustion, add significantly to the fire load, and or give off toxic fumes. In all cases, products or elements of construction requiring a fire resistance or spread of flame performance should have the appropriate evidence of performance based on test information. The final installation should follow the applicable test evidence in all respects. Now, that's obviously in a document you say you've never seen. Were you familiar, at least in the spring of 2014 and after that, with the principles that are being expressed there?
The principles, yes.
Yes. So can we take it that you knew, whatever the MBS spec said or whatever the guidance might have said, that a building envelope shouldn't be composed of materials which readily support combustion, add significantly to the fire load, and or give off toxic fumes?
I think the principle,
Yeah.
but the technical part of it, no, not necessarily. But
You say the principle, but not the technical part of it.
well, you wouldn't assume to you wouldn't assume to be building a, dare I say it, a building that's unsafe.
No.
That's not what you'd be setting out to do.
And were you familiar with the principle in the next paragraph? That products or elements of construction requiring a fire resistance or spread of flame performance should have the appropriate evidence?
I would expect there to be testification.
Right. You can see the expression there, materials which readily support combustion. Did you have an understanding as to what materials in relation to the building envelope would readily support combustion as opposed to those which would not?
No, not any more than no.
What processes, if any, sorry, let me ask it a different way. Did Ryden have any processes in place to ensure that materials which readily supported combustion were not used on any of its building facades?
Well, I think it would be using a competent design team, competent specialist contractors, backed up by building control and all the layers within.
So reliance on others?
Reliance on others, yeah.
I see.
And I would imagine that the specialist cladding contractors were also CWCT members, so I would expect them to understand this document.
What system did Ryden have in place to ensure that the suitability of materials to be used on the facade were judged in relation to their conditions of use?
We'd be reliant on others. We'd be reliant on the design team.
I see. Let's look at page 14 at the top there. Page 14, paragraph 6.4.3.2, materials adjacent to fire stops. The effectiveness of fire stops will be increased where the surface of the building envelope against which they abut is composed of fire-resistant material. This can be achieved by using spandrel panels with a non-combustible insulation. Alternatively, where combustible insulation is used, it may be contained within a steel liner. You see that?
Do.
Did Ryden have any plans to follow the principles set out in the guidance in this paragraph in relation to this project?
It would have done by appointing a specialist subcontractor.
I see.
And understand this technical detail.
I suspect that if I continue to take you through this document, you may give me the same answer. But
Unfortunately, I've not seen it before. Not
right.
really.
So can we shorten this and in this way? Were you at the time relying on others, specialist subcontractors and design teams, to ensure that the design and the construction complied with these specifications?
Yes.
I see. Can I ask you next to look at a document which tells us something about structure, which is ART 509.14. This is a document specification produced by Curtains Consulting, dated the 1st of March 2013. You see that? And it's LO 1212 Spec 001. Structural performance specification for the design, supply and application of overcladding systems to Grenfell Tower. And just so that you know this, it appears at item 170 in the schedule of contract information we looked at earlier on within the design and build contract. I can go back to that if you want to look at it. Were you familiar with this document when you came into the project?
I would have been by the fact of we had all the documents and we would have read through them, but I don't recall this particular one.
All right, well, we'll look at it in a little bit of detail in a moment. Would you agree with me that this is an important document because it sets out the specification for the design of the cladding system?
Yes. Yeah.
Can I ask you to look at page 9, please, first of all? This is section 6, design, and there's a list of things under that, underneath a general heading. In designing his overcladding systems, the constructor must take full account of the geographical location of these buildings and the climate thereabouts. In particular, he needs to consider the effects of, and there's a list of things here, and then 3 up from the bottom of the list, the need for effective fire barriers. You see that?
Do.
Did Ryden have any processes in place to ensure that the need for effective fire barriers, as set out in that specification, was properly considered on the Grenfell project?
By appointing the specialists that knew what fire barriers and where they needed to go were.
And who were those in relation to fire barriers? Who were the specialists?
The specialist subcontractor was Harley Curtin Wall.
Yes.
And then we also had, obviously, the design team, being Studio E, Curtains.
If you look at page 11, please, at the top of this document, section 7, overcladding, paragraph 7.1.13, the system should comply fully with the recommendations of the BRE document, Fire Performance of External Thermal Insulation for Walls of Multi-Storey Buildings, 2nd edition, 2003. And then under 14, 7.1.14, the system shall not be a fire risk at any stage of the installation, nor shall it constitute a fire hazard after completion if for any reason the insulant becomes exposed. Were there any processes in place at Ryden for ensuring that the system wasn't a fire risk after completion?
Yes, because we'd employed specialist designers that should have been designing and installing to the regs. It was then checked by not only an independent clerk of works, but it was also checked by the building control officer.
So, not wishing to summarise your evidence unfairly, but reliance on others?
Yes.
I see. So nobody within...
We would take out, sorry, let me take that. Adding into that, we would do our own quality checks. Site management would do their own quality checks and sign off that the building was built in accordance with what the drawings and the specification were saying. So
Right.
i.e. that the subcontractors that actually did the installing installed it correctly to the drawings.
Let me just see if I can pursue this a moment, specifically perhaps in relation to the BRE document that's referred to in paragraph 7.1.13. Were you familiar with that document?
No, I haven't seen it before.
Have you ever read it?
No.
Right. Is it a document that you'd come across before or had seen referred to before?
Not one that I recognise, no.
Right. If you'd read this document as part of your familiarisation with the project when you came into it, would you not have noticed that it contained this document, this guidance?
I think if I go back to what I said previously, there are hundreds of documents within a contract, and yes, we would read them.
Right.
But to pull out another sub-document and read fully and understand fully all that sub-document, I think would be unusual.
Let's just take a sidestep here, Mr. Lawrence. I mean, we'll come to it later on in due course, but I think I'm right in saying that Ryden had done overclads of residential high-rise buildings prior to Grenfell.
Yes.
And we see two examples of that in your statement.
Yeah, more than one, yeah.
When those were designed and built, did you personally not have any knowledge of or experience of or even a read-through BRE 135?
No, not seen it.
Did
It's never
anybody...
been brought to my attention. I've never seen it before.
Right, okay. All right.
I'd like to add to that. I wouldn't say that's a standard manual and a standard document that, in my experience, other contractors would have knowledge of either. I think it's a specialist item.
All right. So if I was to ask you any questions about it, I'd be wasting my time.
Well, I've not read the document, so I don't know.
I see.
I think to put it in context, we've obviously got hundreds, if not thousands, of components within a building. To read all the documentation out there from BRE and others for each component, I don't think that's
Now,
feasible.
I just want to go back to an answer. I'm so sorry. Did you want to finish your answer?
No, that was it.
Okay, I just want to go back to an answer you gave me a minute ago, which I now can't pick up on the transcript while I'm here. But you said that that you had on-site managers who would check the quality control on site.
Yes.
Did to your knowledge, did any site manager from Ryden who was checking the work that was being done on site examine the work and compare it with the requirements of the Curtains Consulting document, Part 7, overcladding?
Not to my knowledge, but I would think it would be unlikely.
Was it, or did you see it as part of your role as contracts manager to make sure that those site managers on site who were checking the work that was done in accordance with the contractual obligations Ryden had undertaken?
That they would predominantly use the drawings and the specification. That's what they would be using on site.
I see. Does that mean, do I take it from that answer, that they wouldn't be using the Curtains Consulting specification for the structure?
It would be there on file for people to read, but it's not a. I have to say, if on the guys on site to pick up a structural specification when it comes to the design of cladding, for example, unless we're talking about it being the ability to be able to be attached to the wall, that wouldn't be the first document that you would turn to, I must admit.
Right. Was there? Did you regard it as part of your role as contracts manager to make sure that whatever else the site managers checked against the specification, they checked compliance with anything to do with safety, specifically fire safety?
No, they'd be checking in compliance with drawings and specification.
Right.
The fire safety element of it would be via the designers and installers, in this case specialists, if we're talking about cladding specifically.
Right.
But to start pulling out all the technical documentation around each product and understanding that and checking it, no, I wouldn't.
I see.
Expect them to do that.
Mr. Chairman, I've got a short topic which I could probably cover in a few minutes, but
Yes, well, that's all right.
all right, I'll do that. I just want to ask you about the CDM regulations. At the time of the Grenfell project, were you familiar with the duties of a principal contractor under the CDM Regulations 2007?
Yes.
You were. What did you understand those duties to be? In general terms, I'm not asking you to recite the whole set of regulations, but in general terms.
That we would plan, manage and monitor the works, I think is probably the CDM terms.
What did you understand your particular duties, and again, in general terms, to be under those regulations during the project?
Sorry, my personal or
Well, what did you personally understand Ryden's general obligations to be under the 2007 regulations?
to ensure that the construction phase is carried out safely, coordinated. Yeah.
Did you take any steps at any stage to ensure that your clients were aware of their CDM duties on the project or under the project?
Any specific steps?
Yes.
I don't recall that I did, but they had a specialist employer's agent advising them of their roles.
Did you take any steps to satisfy yourselves that Studio E, as a designer on the project, was competent and adequately resourced to carry out the work for Ryden on the project?
I mean, they were novated, so you would expect, although you would expect them to be competent to be able to get to the stage where they've got to. Whilst we had worked with them previously, we knew they were carrying out a 40-50 million pound build with cladding adjacent to Grenfell, so we knew that there was experience there. But I don't recall the process and Ryden's process for checking competence. There is a process, but it would be carried out by a different department. So,
did you check, or did anybody else at Ryden check whether Studio E had ever been involved in a high-rise overclad project before?
I don't remember.
You don't remember? Okay. Did you or anybody else at Ryden check what resources Studio E was able to devote to this project?
When you say check, we knew I'd been to visit them. We'd done. I'm not sure we asked them if they've got 10 people and they've got 10 people free and they're not working on any other projects. No, we wouldn't have been as specific as that. But we would have also expected that if they can't continue with the project because they haven't got the resources, for them to be telling us of that. I think by the fact you're contracting with someone, you're taking it as read that they've got the resources to be able to carry out the works.
What due diligence or investigations into Studio E's experience in a high-rise residential overclad did Ryden undertake?
I don't remember. I don't remember what process it took.
Was there any?
There was definitely a safety process. Yes. How far I can't remember how far that extends to previous experience.
What would have? Well, what was?
It wouldn't be. I don't think it would be unusual that you've got a. We knew they were a reasonably large firm at the time before they changed. We knew they were working for tier 1, tier 2 principal contractors next door to Grenfell. We knew that they were doing cladding on that process. So from observing what they were doing at the time, it didn't raise any concerns.
Right. You say that there was definitely a safety process. From that answer, do I take it that you mean there was in place at Ryden at the time, a process for doing due diligence on architects who were being novated into a new design and build
I think
contract?
On anybody that was appointed, whether it be subcontractor and or anybody we were contracting with, we would have a preferred. So I'm going to say preferred suppliers list. Yes.
Yes, but Studio E were not on that, were they?
Not originally, but they would have as we were contracted with them, they would have to go through that process.
I see.
It would be done by a different department.
And what was the process? This is what I'm trying to get at.
I don't know. I can't recall the ins and outs of the process.
Right.
I don't know.
Had you ever heard of the acronym ERIC? Eliminate, Reduce, Isolate, Control.
I've not heard of it as an acronym like that, no.
No. Have you ever heard of the acronym ALARP, as low as reasonably practicable?
The terms, but not the acronym.
Right. What did you understand ALARP, or as low as reasonably practicable, to mean in its context?
Well, I'm assuming you're referring to risk.
Yes.
So where we can eliminate it, you would eliminate it, and where you can't eliminate it, you would mitigate.
At the time of the Grenfell project, what did you understand about the health and safety file obligations under the Cm Cdm regulations?
That we needed to provide them at the end of the project, or at the end during, throughout the project, we'd be supplying the client with a full set of information relating to the build and what had been carried out.
Yeah, I see. Just go back to the due diligence process a moment. Who do you remember was in charge of doing the due diligence into Studio E to go through the normal processes that you had at the time?
I don't recall names. It would be one of the. It would be the health and safety department, I would imagine.
Right.
I couldn't tell you names.
All right. Mr. Chairman, that's an appropriate moment. I'm about to move to a different topic.
Yes, right, thank you. Mr. Lawrence, we're going to have a break now. And I must ask you not to talk to anyone about your evidence or anything to do with this, with the construction. So while you're out of the room.
Okay.
All right, I'll probably tell you that every time you leave the room, but if I don't, just remember that that's the case. So if you'd like to go with the usher, we'll resume at 22:12, please.
Thank you.
Thank you. Right, 20 to 12, please. Thank you. Yes, would you ask Mr. Lawrence to come back, please? All right, ready to carry on, Mr. Lawrence?
Thank you.
Mr. Lawrence, thank you. Just a couple of questions to follow up on what we were discussing earlier about subcontractors. First, did you understand that Ryden had an obligation to its client in respect of this project to supervise and monitor the subcontractor's performance?
Yes.
What systems or knowledge did Ryden have at the time to supervise its subcontractors' performance?
What knowledge? Knowledge would come from experience. We would have our weekly, monthly meetings. We'd have programs. We'd have finance. We'd have quality.
Yeah.
So that's how we would monitor them.
What knowledge and experience did Ryden have in order to be able to supervise whether its subcontractors, when doing their design or their product selection, were complying with statutory or industry guidance?
What knowledge?
Yes. What knowledge or experience? You referred to knowledge or experience a moment ago.
We they were experienced contractor, and they were experienced in the same type of buildings and doing the same type of thing that was done at Grenfell. So that'd be the experience, and then obviously industry training. As far as knowledge goes,
How would you?
Getting what you?
Sorry.
I'm not quite getting what you're.
No.
What you're.
Let me try it a different way. How would you, as contracts manager, be able to check to make sure that your subcontractors, when doing what they were doing, were complying with industry guidance or statutory guidance?
Well, to employ the correct ones, or what you believe to be the correct ones, and then we would have the layer of building control to ensure that the design and installation was in accordance with the regulations.
What knowledge or experience within Ryden would Ryden use to make sure that its subcontractors complied with statutory or industry guidance, so that Ryden was satisfied that it was complying with its obligations to its client?
I'm sorry, I'm not totally understanding that.
Right, well, let me put
Sorry,
it
can you-
more simply. What knowledge or experience within Ryden would Ryden draw upon in order to supervise its subcontractors' work in order to make sure it complied with guidance?
Well, it's staff, it's management.
Who within Ryden would supervise, for example, Harley's
Yep.
work to make sure it complied with approved document B, by way of example?
We would ensure, so myself and the site team would ensure that the information was given to the other third parties that could check that compliance. That's how we would manage it.
So other people checked compliance, not Ryden. Is that what you're telling us?
We employed third parties that were able to do that.
And how would you supervise those third parties in their checking that your subcontractors had complied with their obligations?
I'm not sure. Can you say it again? Sorry.
Well, you see, you've
Getting confused here.
you accepted that you understood that Ryden owed your client, a duty to supervise its subcontractors. I'm really just trying to
Yes,
explore
sorry.
how you did that. Did you do that yourself, or did you in turn rely on other people to do that checking for you?
Relied on other people.
I see. So does that mean that when Ryden was discharging its, or purporting to discharge its obligations of supervision, which it owed to its client, it actually wasn't supervising itself, it was employing other people to perform its supervision for it?
I think it would depend on what part of the works we're talking about, but overall, by employing third-party specialists, we would supervise them by making sure that they carried their work out in programme and quality, etc. But we wouldn't be able to check to the technical detail, if that's what you're saying.
Right.
But you would have regular meetings to be asking questions whether, design was progressing, whether whatever part of the build was progressing.
Let's turn to the regulatory requirements and industry guidance itself. I think we agree, and correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Lawrence, that Ryden's contractual obligations included ensuring that the building regulations were complied with.
Agreed.
Yes. At the time that Ryden won the contract for the Grenfell project in March 2014, were you familiar with Schedule 1 to the building regulations?
No.
You weren't. So do I take it that you therefore weren't familiar with the functional requirements within the building regulations?
You mean as in what building regulations are?
Yes.
I
What the
understand what
functional requirements within the regulations are.
to set a minimum standard. for
Were
construction works.
you familiar, and I think probably the answer to this is no, given your first answer, but let me just try it anyway. Were you familiar with Part B, fire safety?
I knew that there was a Part B, so I knew that the building regs are broken down into different sections. But again, it would be a general overview. I couldn't tell you what each section meant or yeah.
Well, let's see how far your familiarity went. Can we just do that? Were you aware that Part B was broken down into 5 parts, B1 to B5?
Yes.
You were.
I know it's in parts, yes.
Did you know that? Were you familiar with Part B4, or did you know that there was a Part B4
I
that
knew there
dealt
was
with
a Part B4, yes.
Did you know what it dealt with?
I think it's the external.
You say you think. Did you think that at the time? Did you know that at the time?
Yes, I would have done.
I see. Can we look at B41? That's at CLG 50224 at page 93, please. This is part of approved document B, and this is functional requirement B41, external fire spread. The external walls of the building shall adequately resist the spread of fire over the walls and from one building to another, having regard to the height, use, and position of the building. Were you familiar with that as a functional requirement?
In general terms, yes.
In general terms. And that the roof of the building should adequately resist the spread of fire over the roof, etc. Again, were you familiar with that in general terms?
In general terms, yes.
I see. Was there anybody within Ryden who was more familiar with it on this project than in general terms?
I wouldn't have thought so within the directly employed management, no.
Right. So to put it perhaps colloquially, you didn't have an approved document B bod in Ryden on this project?
Correct.
Right. Do you or did you understand, specifically in relation to fire, that these functional requirements were clear in that fire should be prevented from breakout from the compartment in which it started?
The general principle of compartmentation, yes.
Yeah, and that if it did break out from a compartment, that the spread of fire should be inhibited?
General principle, yes.
Is a general principle?
Yes.
Did you also understand that as a general purpose of those requirements, that the fire should be contained for such a period as to enable the emergency services to be able to deal with it? Yes. And to enable safe evacuation?
Yes.
And also to save lives in the end?
Yes.
Yeah. Now, looking at approved document B, if I can, were you familiar with that at the time Ryden won the contract in March 2014?
Not particularly the content, no.
Not particularly the content?
Well, as I've just said, in general principle, building regulations, that they are there, but
Right.
you couldn't ask me a sub-clause of a subsection, I could tell you what it is, no.
No. Did you know in general terms what the purpose of approved document B was?
Only that it dealt with fire.
It dealt with fire. Did you know that it provided practical guidance with respect to the mandatory requirements of the building regulations?
Yes.
You did. Before March 2014, had you ever occasioned to read the guidance set out in approved document B, which addresses fire safety?
I don't recall, but
All right.
again, it's as a site management, it's I would regard them as reference documents for us as and when, if we needed to investigate further.
Right. Okay.
We wouldn't, as a site team, as a site management, we wouldn't be able to interpret these documents without help from others. Generally, we'd be looking at documents with things like, I don't know, height of handrails and the rise and going of steps and basic elements. But we'd only be referring to those if there was a particular issue, cause, or something particularly raised to it.
I see. Can I ask you to look at page 95? And on page 95, go, when it comes up to the bottom right-hand corner, under the title External Wall Construction, paragraph 12.5, the external envelope of a building should not provide a medium for fire spread if it is likely to be a risk to health or safety. The use of combustible materials in the cladding system and extensive cavities may present such a risk in tall buildings. Then it goes on. External walls should either meet the guidance given in paragraphs 12.6 to 12.9 or meet the performance criteria given in the BRE report, Fire Performance of External Thermal Insulation for Walls of Multi-Storey Buildings, BR 135, for cladding systems using full-scale test data from BS 8414. In general terms, were you aware of the guidance set out in that paragraph I've just read to you?
I think the general principle that whatever gets built shouldn't be unsafe, I think is probably that's a broad term, but
Right.
but yes, but I wouldn't have. I can't tell you what's in those documents.
No. Let's just see how far your
understand.
awareness extends. Were you aware of the risk to health and safety presented by the use of combustible materials in a cladding system and cavities?
Yeah, I would say in general principle, yeah.
Now, we can see from the second paragraph, under paragraph or section 12.5, that there are two alternative routes to compliance within there. First, the guidance in 12.6 to 12.9, and second, the adherence to the performance criteria contained in BR 135, using full-scale test data from BS 8414. Did you understand at the time of your coming into the project that those two alternative routes to compliance with this guidance existed?
At the time, no.
Right.
I'd only ever experienced what is now being termed as a linear route.
I see. When did you first become aware that there were these alternative routes to compliance?
In doing, since the disaster in looking into.
Right. Now, we've already, was there any discussion at the time of coming into the project or thereafter of any of the materials in the cladding and about which route you were going to take? Sorry, I'll put that again. When you came into the project, in respect of the materials that were going to be used for the cladding, was there any discussion about which route to compliance you would take?
No.
No. Can we look over the page, please, at paragraph 12.7, page 96. This is under the heading Insulation Materials and Products. In a building with a story 18 metres or more above ground level, any insulation product, filler material, not including gaskets, sealants and similar, etc., used in the external wall construction should be of limited combustibility. See Appendix A. This restriction does not apply to masonry cavity wall construction, which complies with diagram 34 in section 9. You see that? Now, you see the words limited combustibility there. What were you familiar with that expression or phrase at the time you came into the project?
I don't particularly remember being aware of it or understanding exactly what it means.
I see.
I think in general terms you would, in even non-construction terms you would understand, or you would perceive to understand what is combustible and what isn't combustible, or what it means.
Yes.
And I think again in general terms you would understand that you wouldn't put something on the building that was going to add to the fire and cause obviously the disaster it did.
Well, that answer suggests that you were familiar with, as you put it, what burns and what doesn't burn, so combustible and non-combustible.
In broad terms, as in, I'd know if you set fire to paper, it would set alight. If you set fire to a brick, it wouldn't. In broad terms.
Yes, but what I'm focusing on is the expression limited combustibility, and just
I wouldn't have known that term.
Okay, thank you. Did any colleagues of yours in Ryden, to your knowledge, have any experience, understanding, or knowledge of what that expression meant? Limited combustibility.
I don't know. I can't.
You don't know.
Can't ask for them.
Can I look at SEA 000012032, please? And I'd like you to go to page 2 in this email chain. It's an email from you to Claire Williams of the TMO, halfway down the page there, on the 24th of October 2014. And the subject is Grenfell and windows. You see that? And in the second paragraph, if you look at the first full bullet point on page 2, I'm so sorry, you need to go back a page, I think. That's where it starts. And if we could flip to the top of page 2, which is halfway through this email, you can see the second bullet point, building regs. You see that?
Yes.
And it says, let's look at it together. It says, from experience with refurbishment and having looked at the approved documents, I don't feel that this area is a big risk. If you were carrying out a standard window replacement program without cladding, then you would have no choice but new thicker frames within the existing aperture, thereby slightly decreasing the daylight. Building control would feel the thermal benefits using modern materials would outweigh any negatives. Also, the required background ventilation figures for replacement of existing windows are lower than what we've been asked to achieve here. Now, this email, and indeed this bullet point in particular, was of course in the context of a discussion with Claire Williams of the TMO about the size of the new windows in the existing structural opening. So that it's fair to you to show you that. But does it tell us that you had, on this occasion and in that context, personally considered the building regulations and read the approved documents?
I'm not sure I'd have read the approved documents. I may have sought advice from others, but in relation to windows, I would assume, without knowing the full email trail, that it's talking about U values and the need to meet certain U values. But
this email shows you personally expressing a view and giving advice on how to comply with the building regulations, doesn't it?
In relation to windows?
Yeah, but in relation to that, do you accept that it shows you personally expressing a view about how to comply with the building regulations?
In general terms, yes, but I'm expressing a view to say that I don't feel there's a risk when it comes to the windows and window frames.
Yeah.
So would I have read, if you're asking, would I have read the approved document relevant to that, fully understood it, etc., then no, I would have been relying on previous experience and knowledge.
Yeah. Can we take this email and this bullet point as showing us that in that context and on that issue, you considered that advising on compliance with building regulations was within your remit?
I don't believe it's in my remit. As in, I would seek guidance from others to, if I would present information to the client, as would be expected, and I would either formulate emails like this from my experience from previous, or if there was a particular point relating to regulations, for example, then I would ask others if I was unsure. I think in this particular case we're talking about I believe we're talking about windows, and I believe we're talking about thermal performance.
Yeah, you see, it says, having looked at the approved documents.
But
sorry, do you want to?
Or you finish your.
Do you want to continue?
no, I was going to say having looked at is I understand that to be slightly different to having read it from cover to cover and fully understood everything, but it could easily have been and I don't recall this particularly, but this could easily have been a comment as in, will it meet the U value, and flick through and there's a U value there, and yes it does, or from previous experience.
Yeah.
So
I understand.
sorry, that's
No, and I'm grateful to you, and I don't want to cut you off at all. I understand that. What I'm really seeking to get at here is because you told Claire Williams that you had, in answering an issue, looked yourself at the approved documents, because you say, having looked at the approved documents. My question is, can we take this email as showing us that when addressing specific issues, you yourself did regard it as within your remit to look at and advise on the approved documents?
No, I don't agree that's a fair statement. I would pass on information. If it was something basic and simple, then I could well add, I could well have looked at the approved document. Like I say, I think we're talking about U values here.
Yeah.
I don't think it was my remit to interpret building regulations and to advise the client on that, because I don't think I'm capable of doing that. I don't think I'm competent to do that.
But
Mr. Lawrence, I think you may be getting ahead of
Sorry.
Mr. Millett a little bit on this. I think all that Mr. Millett is suggesting to you is that in this particular case,
Yes.
because you use the words having looked at the approved documents, it suggests that on this question you either looked at them yourself or possibly, I'm not sure whether this is your evidence, you asked someone else to look at them and then report to you so that you could reply.
Sorry. Yes.
That's really,
So
I think,
yes, I agree.
that's
with
as
your
far as we're
statement.
going for the moment.
Yes. Sorry. Yes.
The next question may take you further, I don't know. But
yes, and since you were the one, I think, who looked at them, I'm just asking you whether we can take that as an indication that you yourself were prepared to advise on compliance with the approved documents, rather than relying on somebody else to tell you.
I don't agree that email suggests that. It doesn't necessarily say that I've personally looked at it and then I would advise on approved documents.
Well, it says having looked at the approved documents. Is that a reference to somebody else having looked at them?
I don't recall the email, so without
All right.
going through the chain, I don't recall it.
Let's move to a different subject. I'm going to ask you now some questions about the awareness of different types of cladding and other fires at the time. At the time of the Grenfell Tower project, were you aware of the different kinds of cladding panels available in the UK?
No.
So do I take it that...
Sorry, let me explain that a bit further. Systems, as in ACM or as in cement board or other, then I would have understood there are different systems.
Yes.
But within ACM just meant ACM to me. I didn't know there were different categories within ACM.
Okay. Well, let's just tease out a couple of points of detail from that answer. Were you aware that cladding panels were made, or sometimes made, with a variety of materials, including metal and metal composite materials?
Yes, I was probably aware there was different.
Yeah. And were you aware that ACM panels, and ACM stands for aluminium composite material, frequently contained a core made from polyethylene?
I was aware, I wouldn't have known it was necessarily polyethylene, but I was aware that the ACMs that I'd had experience with in the past were all the same. And I believe, looking back now, that they probably were polyethylene.
Were you aware that polyethylene was combustible?
No.
Were you aware that ACM panels were also available with fire retardant cores, which were less combustible?
No.
To your knowledge at the time, was there any awareness within Ryden as a company of the combustibility of polyethylene cores within ACM panels?
I don't believe so, no.
Was there any awareness within Ryden of the availability of cladding panels with fire retardant cores?
Not that I'm aware of.
Were you aware of the potential fire risks of using aluminium cladding?
No.
Were you aware of major fires which had occurred in residential buildings, both in the United Kingdom and overseas, involving cladding?
The only fire I was aware of involving cladding was relevant to the Chalcots estate and our own previous installation.
Right. As at the spring of 2014, were you aware that a serious fire in South London had occurred in the summer of 2009 involving cladding, resulting in 6 fatalities, namely the fire at Lakenhall House?
I'd heard of Lakenhall House, but I couldn't have told you the details surrounding that.
Right. And were you aware of a spate of high-rise fires in the United Arab Emirates in 2012 to 2013?
No.
What about the La Crosse fire in Melbourne in November 2014? That's after you came into the project.
Yeah.
Not aware of that?
No.
Not aware of the history of high-rise fires in the United Kingdom running from 1991, Knowsley Heights?
Never heard of that, no.
Never heard of it. Garnet Court, ever heard of that?
No.
No. You had heard of Lakenhall House, I think, but were you aware at the time that external fire spread had been an issue in that fire? A factor?
I may have been aware that external fire spread was a factor, yes. I wasn't aware that there was cladding panels on the building or anything relevant to ACM cladding or cladding.
Right.
No.
Was there any training program or internal intelligence within Ryden, particularly to those teams doing high-rise refurbishments, about the lessons learnt from the Lakenhall House fire?
Not that I recall, no.
To your recollection, was there any industry intelligence, information, gossip, even, about the lessons learnt from the Lakenhall House fire?
There may have been. I'm sure it would have been reported in the construction press. So it may have been, yes.
Right. Okay. Were you an avid reader of the construction press, or did it not bother you?
As and when I had either time or it was appropriate, but not an avid reader, no.
I want to ask you now about a guidance document, Building Control Alliance, Technical Guidance Note 18, Issue 0, from June 2014. Now, I've just given it a title. Is that title familiar to you?
No.
No. Are you familiar with the Building Control Alliance as a body?
Not particularly.
Did you know, or do you know, that the Building Control Alliance issue guidance documents for the construction industry?
No, I'm not aware of them.
Do we take it from that it would follow, I suppose, that as of March or April 2014, you were not familiar with any BCA guidance documents?
No, that's right.
Right. Let's just flash one up in front of you to see whether you know anything about it. CEP 000579294. I don't expect there to be a flash of recognition, Mr. Lawrence, so forgive me for this, but here it is. BCA Technical Guidance Note 18, use of combustible cladding materials on residential buildings. I think I know the answer to this question, but I feel I should ask it. Are you familiar or were you familiar with this document?
No.
Right. Can you account for being contract manager on the Grenfell Tower refurbishment, which involved a major overclad of a high-rise residential building, and yet not be familiar with this document?
I think there are a lot of technical guidance and documents out there about a lot of materials in the construction overall. Referring back to my previous comments, the technical and specialities we would be relying on others to be aware of these.
And how would you, coming back to it, you were relying on others, and how would you check whether the others had used industry guidance such as this, if you weren't aware of it yourself?
Ensuring first employing the right contractors or designers, and ultimately, when it comes to compliance, we are looking for the building to be signed off, shall we say, for regulations by building control.
Now, let's just look at the introduction, if we can. BCA Technical Guidance notes are for the benefit of its members and the construction industry to provide information, promote good practice, and encourage consistency of interpretation for the benefit of our clients. They are advisory in nature, and in all cases, the responsibility for determining compliance with the building regulations remains with the building control body concerned. And then it goes on to say the guidance notes based on information available at the time, and the approved documents should be consulted for full details in any particular case. And then looking on at the introduction section, in the second paragraph, where a building exceeds 18 metres in height, ADB 2 recommends for the entire wall area, both below and above 18 metres, either the use of materials of limited combustibility for all key components, or to submit evidence that the complete underlined proposed external cladding system has been assessed according to the acceptance criteria in BR 135. This guidance note outlines both procedures in more detail and addresses common misconceptions relating to combustibility and surface spread of flame ratings. Now, just looking at that, I've read it to you. I know you haven't read this document. Were you familiar with the principle at the time that all key components had to be of limited combustibility, or that there had to be evidence that the complete proposed external cladding system had been assessed according to the acceptance criteria in BR 135?
I wasn't aware of that paragraph.
And you weren't?
No.
I see. Right, and I'm not sure, therefore, that there's much point in me asking any further questions on this document. Well, let me just ask you one more. Can I ask you to look at page 2? In light of the answers you were giving me in relation to 12.5 of ADB before, let me just see if I can just ask one or two more questions. Page 2, it says at the very top, where the building exceeds 18 metres in height, the BCA recommends 3 options for showing compliance with paragraph 12.7 of ADB 2, and there they are. Option 1, use of materials of limited combustibility. Option 2, acceptable alternative approach is the submission of evidence to the building control body that the complete proposed external cladding system has been assessed in accordance with the acceptance criteria in BR 135. And then option 3, a desktop study. Those are the 3 options. I know you didn't read the document, but were you aware at the time of your involvement in the project that these 3 options were 3 available routes to compliance in relation to external wall construction?
No, my only experience had ever been as taking what's now known as the linear route.
Yeah, I see. I'm going to show you a few more documents, Mr. Lawrence, but it may be that if you haven't seen them, we can take this very quickly. But the next one is the next edition of this document, June 2015, version 1 it's called. It starts at 0. The second one is 1. This is BCA Technical Guidance Note 18, and it's at CEL 402347. It's very similar to the edition from the previous year, but if you go to the next page, you'll see that there are now 4 options, and options 1, 2, and 3 remain the same as they did the previous year in the document I showed you just before. Option 4 is new. If none of the above options are suitable, the client may consider addressing this issue via a holistic fire engineering approach, engineered approach, taking into account the building geometry, ignition risk, factors restricting fire spread, etc. Were you aware, in general terms, that by the middle of 2015 there were now 4 options for routes to compliance?
No.
And I think we can take it that there was no holistic fire engineering approach in relation to the external cladding for Grenfell Tower.
No, and to repeat what I said previously, it's only aware of the linear route and no others.
Can I ask you next to look at the CWCT guidance? We discussed it earlier in the context of the NBS specification. Let's just have a look at that. I think it's right, isn't it, that by May 2015 you had come to hear of the CWCT itself as a body?
Yes, I would have known there was a body, the CWCT, out there. Yes.
Yes, I mean I can show you an email string if you like,
Yeah.
which refers to that in your discussions with a man called Mr. David Brissenden of Synergist in the context of. Do you remember that?
I don't remember that specific email, but I would have known who the CWCT was.
Okay, fine. And did you know that it was a specialist professional body in the cladding industry?
By its title, yes.
By its title. Did you know by that point, May 2015, if not earlier, what CWCT did?
I think we probably only ever looked at it when it comes to testing, as in rainwater testing, soakage testing, curtain walling, windows, and items like that. So.
I was asking you a question about what CWCT did as a body, but you've answered me, I think, as a document. But from that answer, do I take it that you did actually use the CWCT guidance as a document, but when looking at specific rainwater questions?
No, but you'd often find in the NBS spec that there will be under the testing regime for curtain walling windows, there'd be reference to CWCT with hose pipe rainwater testing. Now,
I'd like to show you one guidance document from CWCT in particular, and this is CWCT's Technical Note 73 at CWCT 5019, please. This is entitled Fire Performance of Curtain Walls and Rain Screens, and you can see from the bottom of the page that it was published in March 2011. If you put up page 1, there you can see the document. Were you aware of this guidance note as at the spring of 2014?
No.
You weren't. Can I just ask you one question on it to see if it triggers a recollection or just to explore your state of knowledge? Look at the bottom of page 1 and over to page 2. It's quite difficult to have them both there at the same time, but if you look at the bottom of page 1, right-hand column, it says, in England and Wales and Northern Ireland, materials may be described as non-combustible, and if we turn to page 2, of limited combustibility, or class 0, using definitions given in ADB. Materials may also be classified as Class 1, 2, 3 or 4 in accordance with BS 476 Parts 6 and 7. Were you familiar with that principle, or those principles, or guidance at the time of your coming into the Grenfell Tower project?
The only thing that I was familiar with was the reference to Class 0.
Well, we'll come to that later on. You say, but picking up that answer, you were familiar with the reference to Class 0. What did that mean to you?
The surface spread of flame.
That the surface spread of flame, what?
That there wouldn't, that whatever product it was, whether it be internal paint services or whatever, wouldn't promote the surface spread of flame.
I see. And do you remember how you got that information or understanding?
I think not totally. I mean, I think probably originally, earlier on in my career, probably relating to internal paint services in communal areas, etc.
I see.
But I was aware from the previous projects, so Chalcots and Ferrier Point, that I was under the belief, should I say, that the external part of the cladding should be of Class 0. External face, should I say, sorry.
And did you understand anything about how a material would come to be classified as Class 0?
No.
So you didn't have any understanding of the tests?
No.
No. Moving down page 2 a little bit further, we can see some definitions. I just want to pick these up very briefly with you. First of all, you can see the definition of a fire stop, a seal provided to close an imperfection or fit or design tolerance between elements or components to restrict the passage of fire and smoke. Did that correspond to what your understanding of what a fire stop was or is?
Yes.
And if we look at the next column of text, you can see at the top of the page, cavity barrier, a construction to close a concealed space against penetration or spread of smoke or flame. But again, did that correspond at the time of your understanding of what a cavity barrier was?
Yes.
If we
I think we can just add to that. I think we probably would quite often generalise, so we would see them as interchangeable terms. I know if you look at the specifics, they're not, but I think if you, as you will have seen through the documents, you'll see fire stop, fire break, cavity barrier.
We'll come to those documents in due course, but that's partly why I was asking
Yes,
you
sorry,
at this early
yes.
stage. But I think the answer is you
Yes, I
understood
do.
that there was, at least in strict definitional terms, a difference.
Yes.
And they do different things. A cavity barrier and a fire
Yes.
stop do different things. Yes, thank you. Can I ask you to turn to page 4, please? And we can see a statement which runs over to page 5 on the document, which says, for rain screen, this is under regulations, for rain screen walls that cavity barriers are provided, and then over the page, to the top of page 5, left-hand column, to close the edges of cavities, including around window openings, and then at the junction of the wall with a compartment wall or floor. What did you understand the need for cavity barriers around windows to be, in general terms, if not by reference to this document?
I'm not sure I was aware of the need for cavity barriers around windows.
I see.
My experience in the previous projects was that there was a need for to be in line with the compartment walls and floors.
If we turn to page 6 of the same document, we can see a title, Use of Combustible Material. And then in the second paragraph it says, to satisfy the recommendations in ADB, insulation and filler materials in walls of a building with a floor more than 18 metres above ground level are required to be of limited combustibility. This requirement does not apply to sealants and gaskets, so there's an exception for insulation in the cavity of masonry walls. Similar requirements apply in Scotland and Northern Ireland. Was that, and I know you were not familiar with the document or the precise provisions of approved document B as you've told us, but in general terms, was that your understanding of the general requirements at the time you were working on the project?
I don't. I wouldn't have known the difference between the limited combustibility and quite to what elements it would go to or would be applied to at that time, no.
Did you understand at the time of the Grenfell Tower project that materials, insulation and filler materials in the walls of a building with floors more than 18 metres above ground level had to be of limited combustibility?
I'm not sure I'm not sure I remember knowing that at the time.
Right. Thank you. Going down 2 paragraphs to the end of that little section, it says, the only commonly used insulation material that will satisfy the definition of limited combustibility is mineral wool. Did you know that?
I didn't know that, no.
Are you surprised to read it here?
Not given we know what we know now.
Well, no.
No.
All right. Would you? All right. Were you aware of any other insulation material that would have satisfied the definition of limited combustibility?
No.
Did you or anybody else at Ryden ever consider using mineral wool as the insulation at Grenfell Tower, in light of what is said in this industry guidance?
I think there was, I'm sure we'll come on to this, there was, our experience had been that rock wool had been used as the insulation on our previous projects.
It goes on. It is sometimes argued that thermoset insulation materials with non-combustible facings may be regarded as satisfying the requirement. Are you familiar with the phrase thermoset insulation materials?
No.
No. Did you know that thermoset would include PIR, polyisocyanurate? No. What about phenolic insulation?
I've heard the names, obviously, but I couldn't tell you it was a thermoset insulation material.
Were you aware, as an industry professional at the time, of this argument that sometimes argued that thermoset insulation materials with non-combustible facings can be regarded as satisfying the requirement? No.
Sorry, I do have to ask you to say no, because although the transcriber will record that you're shaking your head, it doesn't really work so well.
Yeah. Right. No.
Thank you. And I'm sorry to keep asking you questions about a document you've never seen, but it's really just an attempt to encapsulate the guidance and see if you understood what was out there. Under alternative approaches, you'll see at the bottom of the same column on the same page, it says, for rain screen walls, ADB allows fire testing in accordance with BS 8414 to be used instead of providing cavity barriers and non-combustible insulation, as described above. Where testing is carried out in accordance with BS 8414, the test applies to the complete cladding system, including insulation, rain screen flashings, and cavity barriers. Changing any of these components may affect the ability of the wall to resist the spread of fire. I know you told us you hadn't heard, I think, of BS 8414, but in general terms, did you understand that such a thing as a complete test involving these elements existed as a route to compliance?
No, because we'd only ever used the linear route previously. I'd only experienced that previously.
Yes. Can I then turn to a different subject, which is the system or lack of system in Ryden for disseminating good practice? Was there a system in Ryden for disseminating guidance documents such as this one that's on the screen, so that senior project professionals would be familiar with them?
I don't recall one, but...
So there was no library where a professional who needed to look and understand what technical guidance was out there in respect of, for example, cladding could go?
I think we had a log on to a or subscription, shall I say, to internet-based construction library. So we had that.
I see. So would that library have allowed access to documents such as this, or Technical Guidance Note 18, or the other documents I've been showing you this
It
morning?
would have done definitely building regs. Whether it had this on it or not, I would have no idea.
Right.
Without.
Was there any system within Ryden by which senior professionals in charge of projects would be kept up to date with industry guidance such as this?
No, I don't believe so.
Did anybody at Ryden ever go on courses or training on the building regulations or associated industry guidance?
I didn't, but that's not to say others didn't. I don't know.
Right.
Not aware.
Did you ever discuss CPD, continuing professional development, with your peers and superiors in Ryden?
I don't recall any specific conversations.
Right. Did you take any steps yourself to ensure that you were kept abreast of industry developments?
I think, like I said earlier, I would be reading the industry press, but not religiously and every day, every week. But
Right. And you say industry press. Is there any particular publication that stands out which caught your interest, which you would follow?
At the time, I was a member of the CIOB, so we'd have been getting a monthly magazine from them. So which I didn't always read, but was would come through.
Right.
And then you've got other industry press that is electronic.
I'd like to turn to the question of Ryden's design expertise now, if I may, and to ask you some questions about how Ryden operated as a design and build contractor on this project, and in general terms. The first question is, did you, or did Ryden rather, take any steps to ensure that it had set up an appropriate structure to ensure that all aspects of the design works and all aspects of the building works, the construction works, were to be met?
I don't recall there being a. But the structure would be, again, employing the relevant specialists to be able to give us that advice.
I see. In a project of this size and complexity, in your own experience, would it be normal to establish a matrix of responsibilities which would set out which contractor or subcontractor was responsible for which element of the design?
My knowledge at the time was, I've been there for 11 years, so it was Ryden-based knowledge. I don't recall there being a design matrix document.
Right. What about on other projects other than Grenfell? Are you saying that was true across the board?
Yes, from my experience, from my recollection.
Yeah. Do we take it from that you didn't, at least yourself, seek to establish a matrix of responsibilities in relation to the Grenfell Tower contract?
No, we didn't. Like I say, I don't recall there being a design responsibility matrix process and or document.
And I was going to ask you why not, but I think you may have answered it. It's because you never do. Is that right?
I don't believe at the time Ryden had that process.
Right. If you didn't have such a process, how were you going to ensure that each contractor or each subcontractor understood its responsibilities and its liabilities so that there would be no gaps in scopes or in deliverables?
I don't know. Truth answer is I don't know. It would have been good to have a design responsibility matrix.
Yes. Now we've seen earlier this morning, because I took you to them, Ryden's express obligations in the design and build contract, which it owed to the TMO, particularly to complete the works in a workmanlike manner and to design and construct the works in compliance with all statutory requirements. I showed you that earlier. Is it fair to say that although Ryden maintained contractual responsibility for the design of the Grenfell Tower refurbishment, in practice, it relied on other people to make design decisions.
Agree.
Is that all design decisions?
Yes, we would. Well, we would have a as construction managers, we would have an input into how things were. How do I phrase this? So things were buildability of the design, from a safety and a physically how you're able to build stuff. But that's really the extent of it.
Can I ask you to look at an email, RYD 000395525. This is an email from you on the 22nd of April 2015. And I want to take you to page 2, please, at the bottom. And this is an email at the very bottom of the page from you to David Brissenden. Do you see that? And I think you need to go to the top of page 3 for what I want to show you. It says, we Ryden Maintenance Limited are the main contractor, but only provide management. Our works are carried out, but subcontractors, I think it should be by subcontractors there. In the case of the cladding, it's a company called Harley Curtain Walling Limited. They are also not PAS 2030 accredited. Now, leave aside the accreditation point for the moment. Where you say we only provide management, is that a fair assessment of Ryden's business model? It only provided management?
Yes.
Can I ask you to look, please, next at a document ART 406670 and go within those to pages 4 and 5. You need the bottom of page 4, I think, and then the top of page 5. This is an email. If we go to the... Hold on, something's gone wrong. If we go to the top of... Well, the bottom of page 4, Claire Williams to you, 19th of March 2015. I'm sorry, it's to Simon O'Connor, but copied to you. Urgent Grenfell residents meeting of 17th of March. See that?
Yes.
And if you go to page 5, you'll see that there is a request from Claire Williams, who'd sent you this email, in relation for information in relation to a number of questions that she's proposed on behalf of the residents of Grenfell Tower. And she says at the top of page 5, can you please urgently, in capital letters, ask J.S. Wright to do me a concise paragraph for each of these items in layman's terms? And you can see the items on the previous page. They're not relevant for present purposes. And then if you go to page 2 and 3, and put those up next to each other if you can, or if it is possible, we can see your answer to her, same day, morning Claire, at the bottom of page 2 and the top of page 3. Do you see that?
Yep.
So you're responding, not Simon O'Connor. And on page 3, under on that page, you can see in the third paragraph, or third main paragraph down, when Ryden were contracted to carry out the works. Do you see that?
Yes.
When Ryden were contracted to carry out the works, their design team looked at each pipe size and location to see if they could minimise the space needed for installation. You see that? And then you go on. In the next paragraph, because of the existing low ceiling height within Grenfell, the Ryden design team investigated numerous pipe routes. You see that?
Yes.
And then in the next paragraph, there's also a reference to the Ryden design team under answer to 1, second line. Once Ryden were contracted to carry out the works, their design team and the KCTMO team revisited the HRU position. And then there's a further reference later on to Ryden's design team. You were responsible for this email going out. Did you choose those words, the Ryden design team, or their design team in each case?
I would imagine so. Because if I wrote the email, then yeah, I would have thought so.
What did you understand or intend the phrase Rydon's design team to mean?
Our team of designers. So in this case, probably it's JS Wright, or not probably, it's JS Wright, if we're talking about HIUs and pipework. It would also be architects, structural engineers, especially subcontractors.
So when you use the phrase Rydon's design team, are you referring to individuals employed by Ryden, or are you referring to...
No, I mean as a project as a whole.
I see. So, in fact, is this right, that Ryden didn't actually have a design team of its own in-house?
Yeah, correct.
It was all outsourced?
Yes.
Would it be standard practice for a design and build contractor, given that the contract was to design and build, to have a design manager with design expertise within Ryden in order to control the design process it was undertaking contractually?
Well, I can only talk about my experience at the time within Ryden, and they didn't have a design manager.
I see. But from being an industry professional at the time, was your experience within Ryden common, or was it...
My experience, if I talk about my experience now, then I think, I'm talking on behalf of the industry here, I would say probably 90% of the industry doesn't have in-house design managers.
No.
Some do, but I would say the majority industry don't.
Right, you're saying that now.
Operate the same way as Ryden operated then.
I see. Thank you. Can we then turn to another topic, which is your own role in product selection, but your role generally and in product selection? Let me break that up a bit. You've already explained your role, I think, in your witness statement at paragraph 45, which I showed you earlier in your evidence. Let me just see if we can take it in stages. Is it fair to say that you saw your role as managing the various contractual relationships and obligations between the parties involved in this project?
Yes.
Yes. Did you also see your role as overseeing the coordination and management of the design process without yourself actually being involved in the design itself?
Yes.
Did you also see your role as making sure that the ultimate design complied with the client's requirements?
Ultimately, by virtue of contracts, yes. But if you're implying that I would check every designer to make sure that all of their designs are compliant, then no. I'm not sure if that's what you're suggesting. Sorry,
I understand the answer.
sorry.
Just to be clear, when we're talking about the client's requirements, I mean the requirements set out in the contract between you and the TMO, just to be clear about that.
Yes.
Yes, I see. Can I then turn to your statement at page 10, paragraph 51, RYD 000942220, page 10. You say at paragraph 51 there, the Ryden maintenance team did not have internal design expertise to double-check each aspect of technical design. The contractual expectations required the subcontractors to produce a design or specify the use of a material that was both compliant with legal standards and suitable for the project. See that? And then you say, I would expect a contractor to flag up an issue if they believe there was a problem with compliance or suitability. You see that?
Yes.
And then if you look at paragraph 52, I'll just show you all of that. My understanding was that the materials to be used had either been specified at the tender stage by the KCTMO in conjunction with its designers stroke advisors or by our specialist subcontractors. I would have expected that any material that was specified in this way would comply with the relevant legal requirements. At no point during my work at Grenfell Tower did I have any reason to believe that that was not the case. Just taking those paragraphs I've read out aloud to you, Mr. Lawrence, together, can I just ask you some questions about that? Is it fair to say that neither you nor anybody else in Ryden ever investigated or checked the compliance of any product used on the project with any statutory requirements or guidance?
I don't believe we did, unless we had any specific. I don't recall doing so. No.
Would it also be fair to say that, in fact, neither you nor anybody else at Ryden actually had the expertise with which to do so?
Correct.
Is it also fair to say that you relied completely on specialists, such as architects or specialist subcontractors, in order to provide design advice?
Correct.
And also to raise any issues which arose without Ryden asking?
Correct.
And also you relied on such specialists to provide advice on materials and products and whether they complied?
Yes, correct.
So does it follow from all of that that Ryden wouldn't, and indeed couldn't, actually know for itself whether it was properly performing its own obligations to the TMO to select compliant materials that we saw in the contract?
In the terms that you're putting it, then we would use, obviously, contracts and delegated responsibilities, so others complied and were contractually obliged to comply the same as we were.
I see. So are you telling us that although Ryden had undertaken express contractual obligations to the TMO to do those things in the contracts we looked at,
Yep.
your understanding at the time was that you complied with those obligations by farming it all out to others?
Correct.
I see. Do you accept also that Ryden retained a design responsibility to the TMO under its contract? I think you do.
I do, yes.
Yeah. And how could you do your job to ensure that the designs complied with the client's requirements as promised if you didn't have the necessary design experience, either you personally or Ryden?
Because we would employ people that
Same again.
we would look to employ people that did.
I see. So again, reliance on others.
Yes.
I see. And I'm sorry to harp on this, but let me just see if I can round this off. Given that what you've just told us, would it follow that Ryden was never in any position itself to form a view about the technical accuracy or adequacy of the design drawings for the cladding facade that Studio E produced?
Agreed.
And the same in respect of the design drawings of the cladding facade produced by Harley?
Agreed.
And the same in respect of the cladding or design drawings of the facade produced by Studio E or Harley with approved document B and the building regulations?
Agreed.
Same again in respect of the specification of the insulation or other cladding products for the facade?
Yeah, that would
Again.
down to them, yeah.
And the compliance with the cladding facade as built with approved document B and the building regulations?
Exactly the same.
Or indeed compliance with the industry guidance that I've shown you but you were not familiar with?
Agreed.
Same again.
Yep.
Can I next turn, in the 10 minutes or so we've got before we break, which we may cover in that time, a new topic, design coordination. Can I ask you to look, please, first at RYD 000017870? This is a set of minutes of progress meeting number 2, held on the 19th of August 2014. This is about 5 or 6 months after you'd come into the project. And I think you didn't attend that meeting, to be fair to you, Mr. Lawrence, but we can see on page 1 that you were provided with the minutes for information at the bottom of the first box there.
Yes, agreed.
You do.
Sorry, yes.
Now, if we look at page 2 at item 3.1, please. It says under the rubric Design Development, 3.1, CW, that's Claire Williams, to appoint a client design advisor. And then there's a post-meeting note. CW advised that the TMO will perform the role of the CDA in-house. They will therefore need to sign off all design. What did you understand? Well, first of all, when you got these minutes, do you remember reading them?
I don't recall them.
You don't recall?
I would have read them, but I don't recall them.
All right. What did you understand, if anything, by the phrase client design advisor?
Wouldn't say that's a normal construction term. I don't know if at this point in time there were ongoing discussions regarding the change from CDMC to principal designer, so I don't know if that's relating to this or not.
When you received these, do you remember asking anybody, well, what's a client design advisor? I don't understand.
I don't recall these.
Do you remember whether there was any discussion that led to a decision by the TMO to assume the role of client design advisor?
Only from what unless it's linked to the discussion regarding CDMC and principal designer.
Right. You can see in the post-meeting note there that it's the TMO who are going to sign off all design. Did you have any understanding at the time about what the implications of that would be?
If I was as I'm reading it again now, I would expect them to have meant, and obviously you'll have to ask them, but I would expect them to have meant the things like making sure that there was the right amount of rooms in one of the flats, and kitchens and items like that, as opposed to the overall design responsibility.
Did it mean anything to you at the time?
I don't remember. I don't remember it. No.
I see. Do you remember having any concerns about whether the TMO was sufficiently equipped to perform that role?
No, I don't recall.
Can I ask you to look, please, at SEA 000111955? This is an email from you to Studio E on the 16th of October 2014. Competent, and also to Neil Crawford, Grenfell Design Follow-up. You see that? And you can see, you say, just to give you a heads up, I'm planning to hold a design meeting next week. You see that?
Yes.
And in the middle of the paragraph, you say, also Claire is expressing concerns about the current design, wanting more changes and saying she hasn't got any information. This I wouldn't mind so much, but everything she has questioned so far relates to the tender drawings, which we were obviously issued by the KCTMO, or which were obviously issued by the KCTMO. So either she hasn't read her own drawings, or she feels that they are wrong, or other things have changed since the tender within the TMO. Either way, we need to get it bottomed out and understand their thinking, so costly errors aren't made. Bruce, we will definitely need you to attend, because you're the only one who really knows the history of why the design is where it is, and the historic decisions by the client. You see that? And I'll just show you one more document on this. SEA 000120032. This is an email from you to Studio E again on the 24th of October 2014, where you say, gents, I thought I'd forward you a copy of this email trail to show you what is likely to be said to planners. You say in the third line there, she must have had a change of mind in those 5 minutes, because this got dumped on me before she went on leave for a week also. I'm not best pleased. Anyway, I've tried to put a response together that doesn't undo any of your architectural planning work or tell complete lies. Hopefully this achieves what the client is requesting without upsetting all other parties. Now, the context of that is discussion with planners at that time. But my question is, looking at those 2 emails I've just shown you, in the latter part of 2014, did you have any concerns about Claire Williams' ability to perform her role as project manager within the client?
I don't think I had any concerns. I think just to clarify, the first email, from my recollection, came about when the client was looking to make changes to the lower floors, and Claire I remember Claire had come into the site office and had made comment that the drawings that we had, which hadn't changed, I believe, since the tender, she wanted to make some changes on those drawings, which is obviously entirely up for her to do that. But the insinuation was, you haven't given me these drawings to review, which is why you don't know about the changes. And my comment was, well, nothing's changed since you've given them to us in the first place, which I'm taking that as an intention of what you want us to build, and now you wish to make changes. So that's what the first email was about.
Yes. So I think the answer to my question...
So no, I didn't have concerns.
Very well. Can I then go back to the minutes of a meeting, progress meeting we looked at, I think, earlier? RYD 000178770. And this is the progress update, 19th of August 2014. And we looked at this a moment ago, and you can see you received these minutes for information. Just in general terms, when you receive minutes for information, Mr. Lawrence, what did you do with them?
Well, I would generally read them and see what actions we are required to do.
Yes. And is this right, that it was essential for you to perform your role, that if a matter was discussed at a meeting and you were aware of it, you would do something about it, if it was for you to do?
Yes, I would try to,
Yeah.
yes.
Did you read all the minutes that were sent to you?
I would imagine so.
Did you make notes of what needed to be done on looking at those minutes?
I would have probably used the minutes.
I see. Did you keep any
As the
records?
notes.
Did you keep any records of, or aid memoirs or a diary?
Handwritten records?
Yes.
I would have done at the time. Yes, I would have done at the time, but we haven't got them now, unfortunately.
Right. Do you know where they are or where they're kept? Because I'm not sort of
No, they would have been long since, when we're talking 6 odd years ago. So no, they're long since gone.
Now, we can see here on this as an example that Mr. Blake, Steve Blake, is not recorded as having attended the meeting or even as having been included in the circulation of the minutes. Was that common?
Yes.
Did you brief Mr. Blake in relation to anything that was relevant to your job, which came off the minutes with which you were provided?
We had a weekly team meeting, so anything that was relevant or needed clarification or needed assistance with or guidance with, then yes, we would have done that.
I see. Mr. Chairman, I'm about to turn to a new topic, which is quite a long topic, and I'm just looking at the hour.
Probably the time to stop then, isn't it?
Yes, and we're well doing well. So,
Good, thank you. Mr. Lawrence, we're going to have a break now so that we can all get some lunch. We'll resume at 2 o'clock, please. Please remember not to talk to anyone about your evidence or the refurbishment project at all. And if you go to the usher, she'll look after you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Right, 2 o'clock.
2 o'clock.
Thank you.